Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. Jazakallah khair everyone for joining us today for a new session in our Seerah series. So far what we've discussed, we've talked about in our first session why we should study Seerah. And then we spent a session or two on some of the pre-Islamic Arabia conditions, the good, the bad, the religion of the Arabs at the time. Then we spent some time talking about who the Hunafat were, so individuals who had this concept of Tawheed, who had this concept of La ilaha illallah during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now inshallah ta'ala what we're going to discuss is probably one of the main Hunafat, and why his life and his contribution was pivotal to the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam before he was brought into this world. And this is the legend of a man by the name of Abdul Muttalib, who is the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is the paternal grandfather of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the legend of Abdul Muttalib is solidified by two major events, two major incidents, which he was a key instrument of in his lifetime and was a part of the legacy of Abdul Muttalib and furthermore the legacy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Those two incidences are, number one, the redigging up of the Zamzam well. This played a very pivotal role in the culture of Mecca and can be even counted as a sign that prophethood was near. And the second is the invasion of the elephants, which we will talk about inshallah ta'ala, both of those today. Now before the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, long before his arrival, there was a great miracle that occurred that gives life to Mecca. And we discussed this in the month of Dhul Hijjah when we were talking about the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam and Hajar alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam. We talked about the life of that amazing, incredible family and the miracle of Zamzam, where Hajar alayhi salam ran back and forth between Safa and Marwa 7 times looking for water for her son Ismail alayhi salam, and then eventually they discovered the Zamzam well under Ismail alayhi salam's feet. Oversimplification of the story, but that's essentially what happened. And before that point, without Zamzam, essentially life in Mecca was impossible to live. It's a barren desert. There's no sign of life in Mecca. And so this is the honor of Hajar alayhi salam, that her efforts, her sa'i literally means effort, is what led to the water of Zamzam to spring out of the ground. And her effort now is an act of worship that Muslims do in mass every single day. And it's a very pivotal role that she has played in our deen, Hajar alayhi salam. Now during this time as well, a few centuries later, there was a large segment of the population in Yemen that left their homes due to hardship, specifically economic and environmental difficulties. There was 2 exodus that happened from Yemen. The first one was due to a drought and starvation, and then the second was due to a mass flood that happened in that region. And many of those individuals in Yemen ended up settling in Mecca. Mecca was a very appealing place to settle down because of the Zamzam well. And as a few centuries went by, somewhere along the way, something happened that caused the well to be sealed up. This something was after the passing of Ibrahim alayhi salam, his family. Many people continued to live there. And there was a dispute amongst the people that almost caused a war. And this dispute was who had the rightful ownership over the Zamzam well. Because everybody wanted to lay claim to Ismail alayhi salam, everyone wanted to lay claim to Ibrahim alayhi salam, so everybody felt that we had the most ownership over the well. And this almost caused a war to break out. There was a lot of risk of lives, there was a lot of fear. So a few centuries in, there became a major civil war between the tribes of the area over the control of Mecca and more specifically the Zamzam well. There were people from one tribe during the civil war who ended up taking control over the Zamzam well, And what they did is when they were to control, in order to stop the fighting, is they buried their weapons. And their weapons were made of gold and silver. They buried their valuables, and they buried the Zamzam well. So the Zamzam well, they buried it first. Then on top of it, they buried some gold and silver of their weapons and their valuables. And then they buried that. And then on top of that was even more valuables that they buried. So the Zamzam well is 3 layers deep. And then they covered it to the point, now it's not recoverable. Now, as the decade and the centuries go by, people began to forget about the Zamzam well. Now, generations passed, and Muttalib, the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had become the leader of Mecca. And in Mecca, although Zamzam well wasn't known very much, there was legends about it. People would hear, oh, there once was like this miraculous well somewhere, but nobody really knows where it was or what happened with it. And it's kind of like a folk tale that people will tell about each other. Now one day, this is narrated, this story is narrated in Imam Bayhaqi's Dala'il al-Nubuwah. One night, Abdul Muttalib, he sees a dream. And in this dream, someone comes out to him, an angel. And the angel yells at Abdul Muttalib and says, dig out Taibah. And then Abdul Muttalib, he said, what is Taibah? And the dream ends. And he was like, okay, that was interesting. You ever have one of those dreams that's so vivid and you're just like, what the heck just happened? And the next night comes around. And then the angel comes to him again and he says, dig out Barra. And the man says, well, what's that? What's Barra? Abdul Muttalib asked the angel. And then the dream ends again. Then the next night comes around, the third night comes around. And then he says, the angel says to Abdul Muttalib in the dream, dig out Madnuna. Madnuna with a dad, Madnuna. And then again the dream came to an end. Then a fourth night, where Abdul Muttalib is now having a dream. And this angel says, dig out Zamzam. Then he figures, he's heard about this well Zamzam. All these are names of the well of Zamzam. Taibah. Taibah is because only pure children of Adam drink from it. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says in a narration that the difference between a hypocrite, a munafiq, and a believer is that the believer has immense love for the water of Zamzam and drinks it a lot. Right? Drinks it to his fill. Right? Barra means it's drunk by pious people. Madnuna means that it's something that's coveted. That if someone has it, they hide it. They don't want to share it with anyone else. So Abdul Muttalib, he now knows in this dream that he's being instructed to find this well and dig it up. But he doesn't know where to dig. So he asks the angel in the dream, where can I find this well? And the person in the dream explains that if you go here, there's this area where you'll find filth on one side and you'll find blood on one side. In this area as well, you're going to see an army of ants and they will have a colony. And then you will find a lot of crows that are pecking their beaks into the ground. So Abdul Muttalib, the next morning, what he does is he grabs his pickaxe and he goes out to find it. And the people of Mecca, seeing what Abdul Muttalib was doing, and they asked him, what are you doing? He said, I'm out to go find the well of Zamzam. They began to laugh at him. They said, a man who is our leader is just digging around without any certainty of where he's digging. So Abdul Muttalib, he begins to dig with his oldest son, Al-Harith. He takes his oldest son and they go to this place where they find the crows pecking. They find that colony of ants. They find that on one side there is some blood and on the other side there is some filth. And they say, this is the area that I was told by the angel in the dream. So they dig, and then bam. All of a sudden they see what they found. They unearthed some swords that were made out of gold and silver, and there was some jewels on them. And they kept digging, and then there was another layer, and they unearthed some bricks. There were bricks of gold and silver coins. Then they kept digging, and then they found the top of the well. Then they kept digging some more, and then, Allahu Akbar. Abdul Muttalib found Zamzam. And they began to shout the takbir. They began to say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And when that happened, they got the attention of the others. So the Quraysh gathered around. And everyone was like, all right, slow down your roll, Abdul Muttalib. Right? We are just as much from the family of Ismail alayhi salam as you are. So just because you found this well doesn't mean it's yours. We have as much as a right of the well as you do. Now, does it sound familiar? It sounds familiar because this is exactly what caused the Zamzam well to be covered up in the first place. Because people kept fighting about it. So Abdul Muttalib was like, nah, that's not happening again. Back up. Right? This was informed to me directly by an angel in the dream. I was shown where this well was. I was shown in my dream, this is my responsibility, and I'm not going to back off from it. This is my task. I'm going to dig up this well. And he did this because he wanted to avoid dispute and not let history repeat itself. And he's the leader. So the people of Quraysh, it was very clear to them that they were not going to let Abdul Muttalib off the hook that quickly. And this is the time where Abdul Muttalib was put under an extreme amount of pressure. And he made a vow. He said in this moment that I wish that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me 10 sons that can protect me. And if I ever do get 10 sons, then I will sacrifice one for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's known as the oath of the 10 sons that Abdul Muttalib gave. Now, so he said before things get messy again, they decided to go to Sham where they were going to meet with a kahin, right? A soothsayer. Remember, these people were not on the correct deen. This is why Rasulullah ﷺ was necessary to come about. So there was a good 40 or 50-ish people that were from different tribes that came with Abdul Muttalib to go to see this kahin in Sham. Now what happened on the way is that they began to run out of water. And it became a very dire situation. Abdul Muttalib had some of his family members with him as well. And because the tribes were so at each other's throats at this time, nobody cared for each other. There was none of this system that if I have this water bottle here and both me and Zayd are struggling in the desert, what's going to happen is each of us are probably going to take a sip every once in a while until we can survive as much as we can together, right? But if Zayd is from one tribe and I'm from another tribe, Zayd's going to be like, nah, I'm going to keep all the water for my tribe. I'm going to keep all the water for myself, right? Or I'm going to do the same. Because there was just no muhabba, there was just no religion of love between a brother and a sister, or brothers and sisters and sisters. So these 40 or 50 people, they're all basically worrying about themselves. Unfortunately, Abdul Muttalib and his family were one of the first to lose or to run out of water. So Abdul Muttalib, he told his family that if all of us die, no one will bury us. If we try to fight them, we're kind of outnumbered, we'll be overpowered. So there's only one solution here. And the solution is a practice of the Arabs. What they would do is if they knew death was imminent, they would dig their own grave. So Abdul Muttalib instructed his family, everyone's going to dig their own grave. We're going to sit and chill in the grave. Whoever dies first, the other family members will muster up whatever energy they have and cover up that grave. And then one by one that will happen. And then eventually what that means is that only one of us will be left uncovered, but the rest of us at least will be, will die with honor and dignity by being covered up, right? This was the state that they were in. So Abdul Muttalib and his family are in this very dire state. And they began digging and digging and digging their own graves. And then while they were digging their own graves, you know what happened? Abdul Muttalib strikes water again, digs up a well. And it was a miracle. He saved not only himself, but he saved the entire 40 or 50 people that were with him and his family members. And immediately they knew this was no coincidence. This is no coincidence. There's clearly an honor that is given to Abdul Muttalib, and he has the rights to the well. So they never needed to go to the kahin. They never needed to go to the soothsayer. And they came right back and they said, Abdul Muttalib has the rightful ownership over this well. And this is a very important strategic move. Right? It was clear. It establishes Abdul Muttalib over others. It was clear that he was being led by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that his children, from his children will be born Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this shows us too that these miracles begin to happen in Mecca rapidly one after another. There's something special that's about to happen here. So that when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam comes and he delivers his message and they see the miracles that Rasulullah comes with, they have no reason to doubt him. They've seen it before. They've seen that Allah has protected them. They've seen that Allah is giving them these miracles. And so no one should forget how honorable the lineage of Rasulullah is, that his grandfather is one of the greatest leaders, and the grandson of that grandfather, Rasulullah himself, is the greatest leader. So Abdul Muttalib is born with 10 sons. He ends up getting his 10 sons. Abdullah, the father of Rasulullah is one of those. There's also Hamza radiallahu an, and Abbas radiallahu an, who was of those. And so the list is Harith, right? Then Zubair. This is in order of age, by the way. Harith, Zubair, Abdul Uzza, who was also known as Abu Lahab, right? Muqawwim, Dhirar, who shared the same mother as Abbas. Abu Talib, who was born from the mother of Fatima bint Amr, who was also the same person that gave birth to Abdullah. So the reason why Rasulullah was given to Abu Talib after the passing of Abdul Muttalib was because Abu Talib was not only Rasulullah's uncle in terms of paternal, but also maternal as well. Then there's Abdullah, there's Jahil, then there's Hamza, then there's Abbas. Abdul Muttalib had 6 daughters as well. Safiya, Hakim, Atika, Umayma, Arwa, and Barra. So total he had 16 children. Now when Abdullah reached age, Abdul Muttalib felt that it was time to fulfill his oath. Now that he has 10 sons, his oath was what? That he's going to sacrifice one of his children for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he decided that he's going to do a random pick. But he had a lot of love for his children. But he had to fulfill his vow. So he's very heartbroken over this fact that he had to fulfill this vow. And the people said, don't do that, just sacrifice 10 camels instead. So Abdul Muttalib, what he decided to do is he's going to draw lots. And on one of the lots, he's going to put the name of Abdullah, and then he's going to put another 10 lots of camels, and then whichever one he draws, that's what he's going to do. So if he draws one of the camels, then he'll sacrifice 10 camels. If he draws Abdullah, then he'll sacrifice Abdullah. Sorry, I missed a detail here. At first, he drew lots to figure out which son is going to be sacrificed. And that lots randomly chose Abdullah, the father of Rasulullah. And then his people said, don't do this. Instead, sacrifice camels instead. And then he drew the lots with Abdullah and the camels instead. So now imagine you have like a cup. You have some popsicle sticks with names on them. One of the names says Abdullah, and then there's 11 sticks in there total. And then another 10 have a camel on them. And then whichever one he draws, if he draws one camel, then he'll sacrifice 10 camels. If he draws Abdullah, then he'll sacrifice Abdullah. So he puts those, and the first time he does it, he draws Abdullah. And the people say, no, put 20 camels in there and do it again. So now he has 21 sticks in there total. They draw it again, he gets Abdullah again. And then 30, and then 40, and then 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, all the way to 100. Until finally, when it was 100 sticks versus the one Abdullah, he drew, and then it was finally camel. Right? So then Abdul Muttalib, he sacrificed 100 camels as blood money, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserves the life of Abdullah. Now what's very interesting is that this 100 camels as blood money actually later gets adopted into Sharia. That if someone kills someone, whether accidentally or purposeful, blood money has to be given, and that blood money is 100 camels. Now as Abdullah grew, Abdul Muttalib wanted his son to get married. So Abdullah is at this point, he's now 25 years old. He's the same age as Rasulullah ﷺ was when Rasulullah ﷺ first got married. There was this woman, her name is Aminah bint Wahb. And she comes from a very noble tribe. So Abdul Muttalib, he takes Abdullah and he goes to the family of Aminah bint Wahb, and there's a proposal that is made The proposal is accepted, and the marriage takes place. Ibn Ishaq, rahimahullah, he says that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ comes from the most noble lineage. Both parents were leaders of their tribe. He came from Abdul Muttalib, and her father was leader of Banu Zuhra. Now, shortly after the marriage, Aminah, the mother of Rasulullah ﷺ, becomes pregnant. And then there was a caravan that was going to Sham for some business. And Abdullah, being a businessman, decides to join the caravan. And they go to Sham, they spend some weeks in Sham, and they do trade and business, and they travel for some time, and then they come back. On the way back, however, unfortunately, Abdullah, the father of Rasulullah ﷺ, became very sick. So he stayed in Medina on the way back. The reason he chose to stay in Medina was because Abdul Muttalib's mother lived in Medina. So Abdullah has family in Medina, says, I have family in Medina, leave me here. My family will take care of me, and then when I'm healthy, I'll come back to Mecca on my own time. So he spent some time there. And the caravan comes back to Mecca. Abdul Muttalib notices Abdullah is missing and says, where is he? And the caravan said that he's sick and we left him with your family in Medina. So Al-Harith, he goes to Medina. Abdul Muttalib instructs his oldest son Al-Harith, go to Medina and see what is going on with Abdullah, make sure he's being taken care of, make sure he's healthy, and then bring him back here. Unfortunately, when Harith goes and he arrives to Medina, he sees that Abdullah, the father of Rasulullah ﷺ, had already passed. And he was buried in the surrounding area of Medina. Now Harith came back with this news, and Abdul Muttalib was extremely heartbroken. And on top of that, possibly maybe even more heartbroken was Aminah bint Wahb, his wife. She was very upset. And at this time, she was 2 months pregnant. So from this, we derive that what? Rasulullah ﷺ, he was born an orphan. Because in our Sharia, in our Islamic Sharia, if you lose the father, then that makes someone a yatim. That makes someone an orphan. So Aminah is pregnant with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and says that experience of being pregnant with Rasulullah ﷺ was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. What tended to happen is that other women would say that it was very difficult. Other women would say that being pregnant would cause a lot of pain. Other women said that when they were pregnant, they would, have a lot of vomiting, there would be a lot of illness. But mine was not like that. There was something special about this baby. I had no pain. There was no burden on me whatsoever. I would have dreams that would come to me, and angels would come to me in those dreams and say that you are carrying the greatest of all creation. You are carrying the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When I would walk, the trees and the stones, when I would walk, they would say to me, Assalamu alayki ya Rasulullah. Peace be upon you, O mother of Rasulullah, the messenger of Allah. And before this moment, Aminah was just like any other woman of her tribe, living a day-to-day life, doing the things that the women her age did. And now she's experiencing this amazing moment. That little does she know that in her womb lies the greatest of all time. No makhluk of Allah has ever reached the maqam of this infant. No makhluk of Allah has ever reached the station of this fetus inside her womb. And so this great incident took place during her pregnancy. There was a massive incident that took place about 50 or 55 days before the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in order to understand this incident, we actually have to back up a little bit. Remember in week 2, I think it was, where we talked about where geographically Mecca is, right? In the middle of the Arabian Peninsula, in between Sham and Yemen. Now both Sham and Yemen had their own civilizations, they had their own centers. Yemen had a lot of issues. The Romans ruled there, the Persians ruled there, and they also started to fight a lot. There was a lot of fight for control in that area. A lot of groups were fighting for control in that area, which obviously affects its civilians. And there was also a lot of natural disasters. And those natural disasters led to a lot of famine, a lot of drought, a lot of floods, etc. And they were very great. And on top of that, there was a great oppression on a newly found Christian community there. And this is the story of Ashab al-Ukhdud. In Surah Al-Buruj, قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. There was a king who ruled by magic. Black magic, right? And he instructed the main magician of the time to go and teach a young person to become a magician as well, to help rule by magic. So he gets this young mentee, this young apprentice who has a lot of potential, and he begins to teach him magic. Now what happened is this young man, one day he bumps into a group of priests who introduces him to the religion of Isa alayhi salam, which was the truth at the time. Not the religion of Christianity that we see today, but the religion of monotheism, Isa alayhi salam, that Isa alayhi salam is a prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. So he started learning about this religion, and then he accepted this religion. And this man actually becomes a scholar in his own right. And at one point, he came into the eye of the king, because what happened is that he was told there was a religious man who was helping people in the name of Allah. And he's telling people about this religion of Isa alayhi salam to follow. So he was summoned. And the king finds out that this is the same guy that was supposed to be learning magic the whole entire time. And so he tries to kill him. And he tries to kill him by firing arrows at him. But every time he tries to fire an arrow at him, either the arrow would fall too short, it would go too long, it would not puncture him. Like, it was just very strange. And he was doing this publicly. It was a public execution. So this magician, this is happening, this king, and he's getting very angry. And so this young man, this now priest on the religion of Isa alayhi salam, he says that if you want to kill me, you'll have to fire an arrow in the name of Allah, and then I will die. So the king is put in a very hard place. But he does it. He fires an arrow in the name of Allah, and the arrow hits. And the guy dies. But what happens is now this man just admittedly, publicly, that this guy's religion is what? Is true. It's haqq. And so what happens is all his people begin to accept the religion of Isa alayhi salam. And the king becomes frantic. He becomes panicked. And as all kings do, what do? They love their power. And the thought of revolution is so terrifying. What do? They result to what every king in history has done when they don't want their kingdom to fall, or they don't want to be thrown over, or want to be overthrown. They result to mass murder. Right? He wanted to kill these people, but he didn't know how to do it. He didn't know what to do. Right? So the generals are summoned of his army, and there's a council of how to mass murder these people who are accepting the religion of Isa alayhi salam. There's no bombs at the time. It's still a few centuries away. Hasn't been invented yet. Right? There's no such thing as chemical weapons. The Bashar al-Assad in Syria was doing that to his people. So that's not what's happening here. So what do they decide to do? They decide to build a trench. So they build this trench, this deep, deep trench, and they throw all of those who accept the religion of Isa alayhi salam into the trench, and then they burn them. قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Buruj, the first part of Surah Al-Buruj, is referring to the story of Ashab al-Ukhdud, the people of the trench. Now interestingly, one person from this torture escaped. And he arrived in Sham. And he goes to the Christian ruler. And he says that while you guys are over here chilling, enjoying your palaces, enjoying your food and your wine and whatever you guys have over here, your people are being killed. And he heard about what happened in Yemen. And this ruler in Sham, the Christian ruler in Sham, was so upset at hearing this. He says, you know what? We have some folks in Abyssinia, in Eastern Africa area, who are close to Yemen. We're going to go send a message to them, and they'll handle this affair. So he wrote to the Eastern Army of Africa, which is the army of who? King Najashi, who will come later in the Seerah. And so he told Najashi to send an army and deal with these people. So Najashi, he sends 2 people, 2 generals to wipe out these oppressors. This oppressor, his name is Dhu Nuwas, and they wanted to basically eliminate Dhu Nuwas and his cronies. And they went and they did exactly that. Those 2 generals went and just wiped out Dhu Nuwas and his cronies very easily. Because you killed all your people. You have nobody to defend you. So it was very easy. Very easy process. But now you had 2 of them. 2 generals, new land, new opportunities. What happens when there's 2 generals? When there's 2 leaders? Never works out. It's got to be 1 leader. Right? So the 2 generals, they have a dispute about who is going to lead. And that dispute was first verbal, and then it became physical, and they started to dispute, and they started to fight it out. And one of them chopped the nose of the other one off during this fight. And that one, his name, the one whose nose was chopped off, his name is Abraha. So they called him Al-Abraha Al-Ashra. The one with the chopped nose. Abraha, the one with the chopped nose. He was so upset that his nose was chopped off, he went in full rage mode, and he ended up killing the other general. So now he became the leader of Yemen. When Najashi heard about this, that this guy established himself as the ruler, as the governor, without seeking the permission of the king Najashi was so angry, he dispatched an army to take over Abraha because he appointed himself. Abraha wanted to apologize. He felt remorse. So what he did is he shaved his head as a sign of humility. He went to King Najashi. He asked him and begged him for forgiveness, and he promised that he will rule with justice. And so Najashi forgave Abraha and allowed Abraha to continue rule in Yemen. Now Abraha wanted to make things right. He wanted to win the hearts of the people. So he's thinking, how do I make things right? How do I make things work? How do I attract attention? Well, what he does is, because he knows that the people of Yemen are businessmen, they love commerce, and Yemen has been facing a famine and a drought for a very long time, and this is the language of people, there's a lot of natural disasters here. He says there's something big that needs to be done here. Something big needs to be done in order for commerce to come here. So while he's thinking, the season of Hajj comes, and he sees that there is people in Yemen who are traveling and going up north. And he asks them what's going on. He says, oh, it's a season of Hajj. Everyone wants to go for Mecca to the season of Hajj. There's a lot of trade that happens there. It's a great business opportunity, and people from all over the Arabian Peninsula come here. And everyone wants to go to Mecca for Hajj. And the Quraysh, the tribe of Quraysh, everyone loves the tribe of Quraysh. They're such noble tribe. They're the custodians of the Kaaba. Everyone wishes to be the custodians of the Kaaba. So Abraha, he says, this is it. The Kaaba, from what I've heard, is just some block. Who cares about a block? I can build something better than a block. I'm going to build something better than the Kaaba. So what Abraha does is he orders materials from all these different regions, the most expensive materials that he can think of, and he builds a massive, beautiful cathedral. But what he failed to realize is the people weren't attracted to the Kaaba because of its structure, but they were attracted to the Kaaba because of the piety of Ibrahim alayhi salam. That even though the cathedral of Abraha was way more objectively dunya-wise beautiful and way bigger, people still kept coming to Mecca. And this frustrated Abraha. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, Inna Ibrahim kana ummatan. That Ibrahim alayhi salam, he's a single man equal to an entire nation because of his sacrifices. He sacrificed everything for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was thrown into the fire and he didn't give up. He was outcasted by his father and he didn't give up. He was told to leave his wife and child in the desert, and what did he do? He didn't give up. He was told to sacrifice his son, and while the neck is on his son's throat, he didn't give up. He never gave up. Now, shortly after, there was a person from a tribe called Kinana who heard that there was a man called Abraha in Yemen who built this very beautiful cathedral, and he's doing it to challenge the Kaaba. So he goes there and he does something extremely heinous. He goes at night to this cathedral when nobody's around, and he defecates in there. Not only does he defecate in there, but he takes his stool and he wipes it on the walls. Some narrations say that he even urinated in there, and some narrations say that he burnt a part of it. And he did something very foolish. There's nothing to be proud of, right? It's extremely foolish behavior. So Abraha, after this had happened, was obviously extremely enraged. And it's valid. To him, this was something that was sacred. It was religious. And somebody came and desecrated it. So he took an army. And he took this army and he began to march towards Mecca. And while he was doing this, there was many Arab tribes that tried to stop him. But when Abraha told them what had happened, they understood that what he was doing is actually logical. That, yeah, that makes sense, why you want to retaliate. And this is why we have a code of conduct and etiquette in Islam. When we are speaking our truth and delivering our message, we don't desecrate, we don't degrade, we don't defile other people's belief systems and what they engage in. What we do is we give them da'wah. But at the end of the day, we leave them be. We don't impose our will onto someone, and we definitely don't mock or desecrate what others worship and how they worship. Even the Quran itself, it instructs us not to curse other gods, not to curse other deities, because if we do so, then they in turn will curse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when someone pushes you, our first instinct might be to push back, but that could have very dire consequences. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَا تَصُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَصُبُّ اللَّهُ عَدُوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ عَدُوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. That, O believers, do not insult what they invoke besides Allah, or they will insult Allah spitefully out of ignorance. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in a narration, he actually tells us something very beautiful that's very similar to this, where he says, don't curse your parents or say foul words to your own parents. And the companions say, who would do such a thing? Who would curse their own parents? Who would say foul words toward their own parents? And they say, and here the Rasulullah ﷺ said that when one of you uses foul words or curses another person's father, and they in turn retaliate and curse your father, it's your fault. Indirectly, you insulted your own father by doing that. So similarly, indirectly, we actually insult Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we insult other people's religion, because they will insult Allah. But at the end of the day, that retaliation was our fault to begin with. So for example, I mentioned in my khutbah the other day that one of the things that's been happening a lot lately is people are trying to burn the Quran. Trying to burn the Quran. Now, does it make sense to retaliate and burn the Bible or the Torah or whatever it may be? No, absolutely not. Or whatever documents people find sacred these days? No. And we may ask ourselves, what should I do in a situation like this? And that's one of the questions that comes up a lot. How am I supposed to react to this? How am I supposed to feel about this? How am I supposed to defend the Quran, defend Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger? Well, there's a lot of things that we can do. And one of the things that we should do is by vocally condemning actions like this. But one of the best things that we can do is by becoming guardians of the Quran. How? Well, memorize the Quran. No one can burn the Quran in your heart. Become a hafid in the sense that you're literally a guardian because you act upon the Quran. If your character is the character of the Quran, then you are a guardian of the Quran. That's the best way to defend the Quran, by living the Quran, by preserving it in that sense. And by being really a true hafid of the Quran. Aisha radiallahu anha said about the Prophet ﷺ, كَانَ خُلُقُهُ الْقُرْآنِ, that his character was the Quran. So Abraha, he now has so-called, we will say, the right to destroy the Kaaba. Logically speaking, his retaliation makes sense. Not saying it's right, but it makes sense. So he gets 40 to 60K army members with 13 elephants. And Abraha took elephants along with an elephant breeder by the name of Unais for two reasons. Number one, elephants act as a bulldozer, right? They would walk through and trample towns, and Arabs had never seen elephants before. So to introduce a dozen mighty beasts to them would introduce shock and fear to the Arabs, to make them run for the hills. And scientifically speaking, right, it's actual fact that elephants are the strongest land animal. That if you invoke an elephant enough, you get an elephant angry enough, it can kill a lion, it can kill a tiger, it can kill a cheetah, it can kill another elephant, it can kill a hippopotamus, and kill anything. Objectively speaking, the elephant is actually the strongest land animal. It's just not in its nature aggressive, which is why it's not associated oftentimes with strength. But the main elephant that Abraha had was an elephant by the name of Mahmud. And so Abraha mounted Mahmud, and they marched towards Mecca. While on this march towards Mecca, they came across multiple tribes. There were some tribes that tried to stand up and fight against Abraha's army to protect the Kaaba, but they were just decimated. They were just obliterated so quickly. There were other tribes that said, well, we don't want anything to do with y'all. We love the Kaaba, but we also love our lives more. So we're just going to step aside. You do whatever you need to do. And unfortunately, there were even other tribes who betrayed the Meccans and actually joined Abraha's army. For example, there was a tribe in Ta'if led by a man named Abu Rigal, who was a great treasurer. He was also a class navigator, so he knew how to get to Mecca in the best and most efficient way. He actually ended up dying as well right before arriving to Mecca, and there was a grave that was built for him right outside of Mecca. And the Meccans, for a very long time after the incident and the invasion of the elephants, they would go to that grave and they would stone it, they would urinate on it, they would defecate on his grave, and he became the example of treachery. That if anybody betrayed another individual, they would say, oh, you're an Abu Rigal. Right? He became known as treachery. Similarly to like how, like LeBron left Cleveland the first time for Miami, right? And so like he became the example. So Abraha, he settles outside of Mecca. And outside of Mecca, there was a lot of animals that belonged to the Meccans. And so he raids these animals and he basically takes these animals. Of those animals, there were 200 camels that belonged to Muttalib. So now they're surrounding Mecca. The people of Mecca see this massive army and these beasts that they've never seen before. And they're wondering, what should we do? We either fight and we die, or we leave and just hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects us and protects our stuff. We have no chance in battle. So they decided to leave. Allah's got this. And they just go into the mountains. Abdul Muttalib, he meets Abraha. He goes personally, he inquires about Abraha, and he sets a meeting up with Abraha, and he goes and he meets Abraha. Abraha, when he sees Abdul Muttalib for the first time, he was terrified. He sees a very tall man, a very strong individual, a very handsome man. One of those individuals that when they walk in a room, they command respect. Abdul Muttalib, he said, you took some of my animals. You took 200 of my camels and I want them back. Immediately when Abdul Muttalib said this, Abraha lost all respect. So you care about these animals and not the Kaaba? Abraha said to Abdul Muttalib, when you walked through that door, I was in instant awe of you. This is an actual leader right here. But now when I hear you talk, I'm just dumbfounded. Are you really here to talk about 200 camels? You don't want to talk about the Kaaba? The center point of your religion and the religion of your forefathers? Your whole identity is based off of this Kaaba. And you don't want to talk about that. And so Abdul Muttalib, he responds very eloquently. He says, what you don't understand is that I am the owner of these camels. I am responsible for these camels. I am here to defend my property. What you're not realizing is this house that you are going to attack also has an owner, it has a master, and he'll take care of it. I am the master of these camels. Allah is the master of the Kaaba. So Abraha releases the camels. Abdul Muttalib, he goes back to the Kaaba for one final time. He goes to the Kaaba, he raises his hands, he's on his knees, and he's crying in front of Allah. He says, Ya Allah, this is your deen. Ya Allah, this is your house. This was built by your Prophet. And what's so beautiful is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ actually had a similar dua in Badr. That, Ya Allah, if you don't help us, then there will be no one left on this earth to worship you. So Abdul Muttalib, he pleads to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then he heads into the mountains. Abraha, however, he was only interested in the Kaaba. He said, I don't want to kill anybody. I don't want to raid anybody's homes. Even though he instructed his soldiers not to raid homes, there was 60,000 of them. And when there's 60,000, mob mentality happens. And some of them actually did go and raid homes. But nobody was killed. So everybody left. He says, my only interest is the Kaaba. I don't want to kill anybody. So don't stand in our way. The next day comes. And the army starts to march towards Mecca. And between Muzdalifah and Mina, there is this area called Wadi Muhassar. And this is where Abraha's elephant, Mahmud, where we all know, he sits down. And all the animals, when they see the lead animal sit down, what do? They all sit down as well. And Abraha is frustrated. So he calls Unais, the elephant breeder, and says, get him to go. So they start beating Mahmud, the elephant, to get him to go, but he's not moving. They even tried to drag him with hooks. Nothing was happening. He was not moving. And then when they would stand up to go turn around and go towards face Yemen, the animals would start to stand up and move again. And then they would turn them back around and face them towards Mecca, and then they would just sit down again. But what Abraha failed to understand is that no matter what you do to these animals are commanded by Allah. Every creation lives by the command of Allah. And so the camel of Rasulullah ﷺ, during the time of Hudaybiyah, it sat down during their journey. And the people started saying things about the camel. And the Prophet ﷺ, they were saying things like, oh, the camel's not moving, it's stalling us, it's keeping us up. And the Prophet ﷺ said, leave my camel alone, for the one who had the elephant sit down is the one who had my camel sit down. Something is going to happen here. And that is when the Treaty of Hudaybiyah occurs, which we'll talk about in depth when we get there. And then the army of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes. A great army. Birds in large numbers. And these birds, often, I don't know about you guys, but when I was young and I heard this story, I often imagined the birds to be like these pterodactyls, right? Like these massive birds who were just kind of coming and just shredding apart the army. That's actually not true. The birds were tiny. They were like sparrows. And each bird had 3 pebbles, one in each claw and one in its beak. And each stone was the size of what? Not some boulder, but a chickpea. And so it tells you what? It tells you something very interesting, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can show His might and His power in even the smallest things. Right? We talked about this a little bit during the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, but King Namrud, the king at the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam, his army was destroyed with a single fly. The power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ. That, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet, have you not seen how I dealt with the Ashab al-Fil, the people of the elephants? And this is 50 days before the Prophet Muhammad's birth. And so the birds are coming in and they're flying in fast. And Surah Al-Fil says, have you not seen? But what's interesting here is that the Prophet wasn't even born to see it. So why is the Quran saying, have you not seen? Well, Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, he says in his tafsir that it was so widespread news. It was so mutawatir. It was such a massive event that everybody talked about it year by year, day by day, that even the one who did not see it was like the one who saw it. A modern day example that I can think of is kind of like the I Have a Dream speech of Martin Luther King. Most people in this room were not actually alive to see it. But everybody knows about it. And many of us, I don't know if you guys in school, but many of us have actually memorized the speech. Because it was so talked about all the time. Year by year, people are talking about it. So even though you weren't there to see it, you actually did see it by how much it was talked about. Right? وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ. And so the flock of birds were sent. And pebbles started to fly. And the pebbles, they would hit the skin of the army, and the people's bodies would melt. And these birds obliterated Abraha's army. These stones were unique both in their structure and the way they fell from the sky, that they were basically like bullets. They would cut through, they would cut off their limbs, they would burn their flesh. These stones, they fell on the elephants, and they would cut through the elephant, and they would kill the animal, which is a crazy miracle. Because again, right, don't ask me how I know so much about elephants, okay? But like, elephant skin, they have the thickest skin. Their skin is very tough to get through. But one of these chickpea-sized pebbles can cut through an elephant in half. And so Abraha's soldiers were falling left and right. تَرْمِيهِمْ بِحِجَارَةٍ مِّن سِجِّيلٍ. And so Abraha runs. Like the foolish man he is, he runs away, thinking that this is going to protect him. And Abraha was hit by the stones along with others a few times. And he was able to escape that place, but the stones that hit him impacted him in a different way. Where first it made him feel very sick. There was burn marks all over his body, and he began to feel very sick. And on his way back to Yemen, at another point when they had to stop, they saw that his body began to rot. And then his fingers began to rot. His toes began to rot. His limbs started to fall off. And then he got to a place where he became in a vegetative state. And then right before they reached his kingdom, he became completely disabled, and he died. فَجَعَلَهُمْ كَعَصْفٍ مَأْكُولٍ, leaving them like chewed up straw. You know, كَعَصْفٍ مَأْكُولٍ, what that's like, what happened to this army of Abraha, this is like when you go and if you ever go to a cow, and a cow is eating on grass, and after they're done eating, go and see like the bottom lip of the cow. There's like this like chewed up bits of grass that are like on the bottom lip of the cow. It's like very gross, very chewed up, very disgusting, very shredded up. That's what like kasf ma'kul is, right? Just absolutely destroyed, absolutely obliterated. You can't even recognize this army anymore after the birds, the small sparrow-like birds, throwing the small chickpea-sized pebbles onto that army. And again, this incident was a sign that something great was coming. Something great was about to happen. Now, not everyone in Abraha's army was killed that day. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left some of them alive so they can bring their message back to their people. And this created a lot of lure about the Kaaba, about how sacred this place was, about how this place is untouchable. And all of this happened, what? About 2 months before the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Ana da'watu Abi Ibrahim." I am the result of the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam. رَبَّنَا وَبَعَثْ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِكَ وَيَعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. Oh Allah, rise amongst them a messenger who will recite to them your revelations. وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, and who will teach them the book and wisdom and purify them. إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. You alone are the one who is the most mighty and the most wise. And there's only one prophet. This dua was made by Ibrahim alayhi salam in Mecca, and there was only one prophet that was born in Mecca. There are prophets that have visited Mecca, or who were born elsewhere and maybe settled in Mecca, but the Prophet ﷺ is the only one who are actually born in Mecca. And before that, there was actually 2 other du'as that Ibrahim alayhi salam made. رَبِّ اجْعَلْ هَذَا بَلَدًا آمِنًا وَارْزُقْ أَهْلَهُ مِنَ الثَّمَرَاتِ. That this land of Mecca, protect it. Make this city safe. Make it secure. And provide fruits to its people. And how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how could He accept two of the du'as of Ibrahim alayhi salam but not accept the third? Of course the third is going to be accepted. And so He accepts the first two du'as of Ibrahim alayhi salam through what? Through أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ. He protected, He made sure that the Kaaba was secure. And He gave them the provisions that Ibrahim alayhi salam asked of لِإِلَافِ قُرَيْشِ إِلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. That the land of Quraysh was secure. We talked about in week 2 about how the way the Arabian Peninsula is set up made it very difficult for outside political forces to come and conquer the land. إِلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. That people would travel from Mecca, would go to Sham, would go to Yemen, and the people in Yemen and Sham would come to Mecca for trade. And so that place, even though it's a barren desert, became a very prosperous place for trade. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that when I provide protection for you, when I provide food for you, I provide wealth for you, all I ask for you is one thing. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. That I ask you to just worship me. Right? Worship the one who, this house of yours, this house that you see, this Kaaba, this is my house. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But every single time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks the people to worship Him, what happens? There's people that are going to deny. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you not seen those who deny? There's 3 qualities of the people who deny that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes. يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمِ. They turn away the orphan. وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. They do not like to feed those who are poor. فَوَيْلُ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Woe to those who pray. Woe to those who pray. الذين هم عن صلاتهم ساهون الذين هم يراءون ويمنعون الماعون. Those who do pray, but they're very lazy with their prayer, or they just pray to show off. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet ﷺ to not be like these people. إِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرَ. Because we have given you an abundance. فَصَلِّ. Pray, but not like those people. لِرَبِّكَ. With sincerity to your Lord. وَانْحَرْ. And sacrifice and give to those in need, and feed, not like those people. And every single time you have a group of individuals who are believers and a group of individuals who are disbelievers, you're going to find there's going to be verbal conflict. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. And every single time this verbal conflict begins to escalate, that verbal conflict turns into what? Physical conflict. إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ. And the peak and the manifestation of that is when Rasulullah ﷺ conquered Mecca and became victorious. And during this entire process, there's going to be individuals with Rasulullah ﷺ who are going to side with him and people who are going to side against him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds him that even your own family members may side against you. تَبَّتْ يَدَ أَبِي لَهَبِ وَتَبْ. But during this whole process, never forget the reason why you are doing this. Never forget the reason why you are fulfilling your purpose. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. To establish the sincerity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. And to establish the religion of Islam. And by doing this, we seek protection from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. مِن شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ. Whether it's the unseen or the seen. مِن شَرِّ الْوَسْوَاسِ الْخَنَّاسِ الَّذِي يَسْوَسُ فِي صُدُورِ النَّاسِ مِنَ الْجِنَّةِ وَالنَّاسِ. This connection between the last 10 surahs of the Quran, you can find this connection. Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi mentions it in his tafsir. This is a very beautiful connection between the last 10 surahs. Now let's fast forward 50 days later, where something amazing happens. إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَمَلَائِكَتَهُ يُصَلُّونَ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا صَلُّوا عَلَيْهِ وَسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. Salman al-Farsi, he says in a narration that his mentor and his teacher said to him that there's no place left in this world to find guidance. So you need to go to this city. And he described the city of Medina, and he said, there you will find the final prophet. There you need to just wait for him. And from what we know from weeks past that we've discussed, that the world became a very dark place before the arrival of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib stands in front of Najashi, and he says that we were an ignorant people. This narration we'll discuss further when we get to it, inshallah. But we have no focus, we have no vision. We kill our children, we take care of dogs more than our children. The strong would eat from the weak, and the people were getting into haram relationships. People were worshipping idols. Tawheed has been erased. And when we reflect on this, we can see that it's very similar to what we see today. Zina being common, value of human life has gone down, people preferring the lives of animals over their own children. Right? Taking care of animals is great, but when it becomes being negligent to your own family or even starting a family for the sake of taking care of animals, then we have a problem. And to be clear, it's not either or. As a Muslim, we should be looking for both. Like Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh. His name is literally the father of cats. He loved to take care of cats, but he also took care of his family. He had a balance. But there was so much darkness, there was so much ignorance. You know, subhanAllah, there was this, I saw this clip from a comedian the other day where he shared a story about his father who passed away from cancer. And then he said that after his father passed away from cancer, his father's dog went on his father's chair, and the next day, out of sadness, the dog died. What happened is the crowd awed at the dog dying, but the crowd didn't awe at his father dying from cancer, and he called everybody out. He said, none of you guys cared that my father died about cancer, but you cared about his dog. And it's funny, but at the same time, it's this narration literally manifesting. And Ja'far ibn Abi Talib is saying that this is what we were before Islam. This is what we were in the days of ignorance. Right? And again, I say this all the time. Keep that in mind next time you hear somebody say progress. Right? Inshallah. So there was so much darkness and ignorance in the world. The Western world, as we see today, they frown at a mention of Allah. Right? It's seen as backwards. Although the qualities that Ja'far ibn Abi Talib is describing is some of the qualities that we're seeing being resurrected today. And so the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, it was as if he was set into a dark room and someone lights a match and that light begins to shine in all corners. And so similarly, as inheritors of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as being part of the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we have that same guidance, we have that same light. And although there's darkness in the world, we can be that light. There's always hope in this world as long as we have Islam. There's always going to be hope. And there was Jahiliyyah that was different for the Romans, and Jahiliyyah that was different for the Persians. And born to the people of Mecca on a Monday in Rabi' al-Awwal. Now what day on Rabi' al-Awwal? There's a lot of discussions, right? The most common is the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, but technically the strongest is the 8th. And there's a lot of different discussions. But most scholars agree that it did happen in the month of Rabi' al-Awwal. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was fasting on a Monday, and the companions asked him, why do you fast on Mondays? And he said that this is because this is the day that I was born in. So Aminah explains, the mother of Rasulullah ﷺ, explains her experience being pregnant. That women would talk about pregnancy being difficult, but life was not difficult for her. It was not a burden for her. She would hear, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah, that the trees and the stones would greet her and say that you are the mother of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You are creating the greatest of all mankind. Imagine how powerful this must have been for her. From average mother to the mother of the greatest. And she would say that she would see a light that is emitting from her. And the same light came at the time of the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. And so we talked about how Rasulullah was da'wah to Abi Ibrahim. He said, I am also the bushra of Isa. وَمُبَشِّرًا بِرَسُولِ يَأْتِي مِن بَعْدِ اسْمُهُ أَحْمَدُ. That Isa alayhi salam said that I'm giving you guys the good news of a messenger after me whose name will be Ahmad. And so with light emitted from the mother of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they said that Sham, the city of Sham, lit up on the day of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's birth. This is a sign that Sham will be reached with Islam, and it will always remain there. And this place will always be a strong hub of Islam. And we know this because also Sham will be the place in which the army that defeats Dajjal and rises against Dajjal is going to come from the region of Sham. And now, in the early hours of the morning, in the month of Rabi' al-Awwal, the moment that we've all been waiting for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has now entered this world. And the midwife of Aminah, Fatima bint Abdullah, says that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he plants his hands on the ground when he is born. He fists up his hand, he takes some soil into his hand. He lets go of the soil, he lifted his forehead to the sky, and then he lowered himself all the way to the ground as if in sajda. And then a light emitted where the entire area became light and everything became beautiful. Because a light has just entered into a dark world. And this is the moment where our beloved Prophet Muhammed, ibn Abdullah, ibn Abdul Muttalib, ibn Hashim, ibn Abdi Manaf, ibn Qusay, ibn Kilab, ibn Murrah, ibn Ka'b, ibn Lu'ay, ibn Ghalib, ibn Fair, ibn Malik, ibn Nadr, ibn Kinana, ibn Khuzaymah, ibn Mudarika, ibn Ilyas, ibn Mudar, ibn Nizar, ibn Ma'ad, ibn Adnan, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, was born into this world. And inshallah ta'ala, we will leave it and conclude here on that little cliffhanger, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Do we have any questions before we conclude, inshallah? Sisters, brothers? Yes, ma'am.
Question in mind, if the mother of Prophet like she knew, Prophet get to hear those, like that the tree, the box saying that you're gonna be the mother of the Prophet, but I don't think he would be that surprised at it.
Surprised that he was the messenger of Allah? Well, I mean, even the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam received signs that he was going to be the messenger of Allah before he received revelation. The shock doesn't come in the fact that he received revelation, it was how. Right? Ibrahim alayhi salam revealed, why am I blank? Jibreel alayhi salam revealed himself in his true form to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? And his true form is a very intimidating form. So it's not that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was shocked that he received revelation, it was more how he received revelation. Yeah. Any other questions, sisters? No? Yes, Ahmed?
Strange question. But like in that case, then if the mother of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam kind of knew that she was carrying a messenger, does that make her a Muslim?
Man, you love opening up these can of worms, don't you? So he was asked a question about if the mother of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew that she was carrying Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, does this make her a Muslim? So this is actually something that is a contentious point of the ulama about whether something called najat of the parents of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about whether the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's parents were Muslim or not, and whether they will be granted paradise or not. And the issue is not as clear-cut as it seems, right? But one thing that I was taught regarding this, and this is going to be my answer, it's not a satisfactory answer, but this is going to be my answer, is that because this is something that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wouldn't have want us to discuss. Like imagine your parents pass away and people discuss whether they're in paradise or not. You know, that's a very hard thing to deal with. That we should refrain from discussing that type of stuff, inshallah, right? Wallahu a'lam. Sorry, I think there's some online questions. Good question, actually. I don't know. I can ask that. If Abdul Muttalib was considered a monotheist, why was one of his sons named Abdul Uzza? Right? Abdul Uzza was also known as Abu Lahab, and Uzza was one of the idols that was worshipped at the time. I do not know the answer to that question, but that's a good question. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, sorry. Let's go in the back here first. And then I'll get you. Yeah. Yeah.
So my question was, who took care of the Prophet's mother, like financially, and like, so did she go back to her father,
Yeah, so she came from a very wealthy and noble tribe. Yeah.
During that time of pregnancy, who was there to kind of like mentally be there to support her? Did she have like a friend, yeah?
Yeah, so she had a midwife. Her name was, I have it here. Just give me a second. Fatima bint Abdullah. Right, yes. So good question. Yes, Amadou.
Yeah, a little bit related to last week's lecture is about the Hunafa. We know that there was many of them, and some of them lived into the time of the Prophet ﷺ. We talk about them as if most of the time that the ones that lived before the Prophet ﷺ is like they were on the right path, that they're like on their own ummas, right? And but we know that some of them lived to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and they did not accept him. So some of them became kafir.
Yes.
So like those being a Hunafa makes you like Abu Talib also. Right?
Like Abu Talib?
Or
Abdul Muttalib?
Abdul Muttalib. You say he's a Hunafa.
Yeah, so the majority of scholars, not all the scholars to be fair, right? Not all the scholars to be fair say that Abdul Muttalib is from the Hunafa, but the majority of scholars do say that Abdul Muttalib is from the Hunafa. And the reason why they say he's from the Hunafa is specifically because of one narration where after the Kaaba was protected, he recited some very eloquent poetry. We're saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who protects. He is the one who provides. He is the one who, I don't remember the poem exactly fully, but he goes on and on talking about the tawheed of Allah. So because of this poem, a lot of scholars say that, he did show that he was a monotheist. But, the question comes about, if he was a monotheist, why was one of his children named Abdul Uzza? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I am going to do the research about that, inshallah, and then bring an answer to that question next week, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, inshallah, we'll conclude here. If you have any other questions, just please come up. No problem, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Salamun ala mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.